Long before Egypt raised its pyramids, before Mesopotamia wrote its first clay tablets, there was said to be a shining empire, a world-spanning civilization that vanished in a single day and night beneath the sea. Follow me down the rabbit hole about the lost city of Atlantis. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Atlantis. Thank you, Kenny, Kay, Cersei, Haley, and Laura for requesting this episode. I'm really excited to do it. At first, I was like, I don't think there's that much information about Atlantis. But then, of course, I started researching and I found so much information about Atlantis. Before we get started, I love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, super cheap, super convenient, go to rabbithole.gold right now. The link is also in the show notes if you're curious. Also, I have new merch coming. I have a new hoodie. It's really cool. Mine's already in the mail. It's on its way to me, but you guys can get it right now. Free shipping in the US. Super easy. You can go to stayskeptical.com because I have my own website now and go to the shop tab and shop all of our merch. Whatever shirt you like, check it out right there. And we also have blankets in the merch store as well. So if you like to cuddle up with a blanket that says the rabbit hole, you can do that. I know people get mad at me for talking about my merch. I don't do it often, but every now and then I do have to tell you guys about it because I think it's really cool. And if you want stickers, leave me a rating review. Send me the screenshot of that. I'll send you some stickers. And if you want an extra bonus episode every single month, go to patreon.com right now. Okay, I'm done advertising. Let's jump in. The first record of Atlantis was from Plato around 360 BCE. He writes of Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. According to him, Atlantis was a powerful island empire located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, and it was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Basically, where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic. It was ruled by a dynasty descended from Poseidon. So Poseidon had claimed the island as his domain. I guess at the time, the myth is that all the different gods claimed different regions of the world as their own. This island was claimed for Poseidon because on the island he found Cleito. She was this extremely beautiful mortal woman, and she was living on this island all alone because her parents had died and she was just by herself. And Poseidon fell in love with her. So he was like, nope, this is my island. I will be with Cleito. In order to protect her, he reshaped the island into three perfect circles. Cleito was placed on a hill at the center of the island, and this way, no ship could actually reach her without his permission. There were canals where ships could sail between the islands because it was land, water, land, water, land. So there were canals that you could get through to get to the next circle of land, but Poseidon could easily close those canals off. Cleito had 10 sons with Poseidon. The firstborn, Atlas, received the greatest gift, being that he was the king over all of Atlantis. And this is how the island also received its name. The Atlanteans were a noble and advanced civilization with sophisticated architecture, engineering, and a complex social structure. Eventually, though, their pride got the best of them and they launched a war to conquer Athens. So before this, they had already conquered all the other areas of the world. Athens was the very last piece of the puzzle that they needed to conquer. And Athens really shouldn't have won. Really, the Atlanteans were so much more sophisticated in everything that Athens should have never won, but somehow they did. This conflict ended with the destruction of Atlantis, which sank into the ocean in a single day and night. This was due to a catastrophic earthquake and a flood that came with that. So this is all what Plato is telling you in this story. However, Plato says the story that he's telling isn't his own, that it has been passed down through generations, originating with the great Athenian statesman Solon around 600 BCE. In Plato's writing, Solon traveled to Egypt. On his way to Egypt, he visited the city of Sais, where priests of the goddess Neith told him a story preserved in their ancient archives. They claimed their records stretched back 9,000 years. So we're talking about 9,600 BCE. That's approximately 11,625 years ago. Around that same time was the Younger Dryas impact. This impact, which has been scientifically backed up by geological core samples, caused massive floods around the world. In those records, they described a mighty island civilization. From this vast land, the Atlanteans ruled an empire that stretched across Europe and Africa. Plato described all this in like super great detail, far too precise for it to have just been a story. And that's what everyone's like, oh, it was just Plato like telling a story because he was trying to scare the Athenians into like acting properly and not being like prideful because that's what killed the Atlanteans. But he gave like measurements of the city, like numbers of ships and soldiers, descriptions of metals, animals, plants, and laws, like all these things that if it was just a story, why would you go through all the trouble to give such precise numbers? And the weirdest part is Critias just ends in the middle of a sentence. There wasn't really an ending to the tale. And if this was just a piece of fiction, why wouldn't he just finish it? Some people are like, oh, he just like got sick of it and moved on to his next piece of writing. But he was kind of at this really pivotal point in the story where Zeus was about to give this epic speech, and then he just like middle of a sentence never finishes the story. Almost as if either somebody told him to stop writing or if somebody erased the story. It's very odd. But here's what we know about Atlantis. So, Atlantis was a vast island continent. It had mountains in the north and fertile plains in the south. The land was rich with resources. The rivers and canals irrigated the farmland, which produced two harvests a year. The island had copper, tin, gold, silver, and orichalcum, which is this like red metal that is incredibly valuable, more valuable than silver, but it's normally found in video games nowadays. It's not something that you can just like go out and mine for. But I have this theory that everything is based on something. So how did they come up with it for video games unless it could have been found on Earth at some point, or unless maybe they're keeping it all for themselves, whoever they are. And we'll get into who they are in just a while. But anyway, so it had lots of land, lots of like very fertile farmlands. You're growing things, you're mining for precious metals, precious gems, all these fantastic things. At the heart of Atlantis was the capital. This city was unlike any other, and around the city were concentric rings of land and water, like I explained earlier. So, three rings of ocean separated by two rings of land. The outermost ring was about 4 miles wide, and it housed harbors big enough for the largest ships to base out of. And then it had a canal about 50 yards wide, which connected the rings. The middle ring held barracks for soldiers, stables for horses, and training grounds for the warriors. And of course, at the very center was where the king's palace was and also the temple of Poseidon. There were bridges and canals connecting the rings. Each of them were wide enough for ships to pass through, so you could potentially go to the next ring if Poseidon allowed you to. The outermost wall of the outermost ring was plated in bronze, and then the next wall in on the next ring was plated in tin, and the innermost was plated in orichalcum. And of course, all around there were towers, temples, palaces, all these different things. And at the very center was the Temple of Poseidon. The temple was built of gold and ivory, decorated with precious stones, and had a huge statue of Poseidon driving six winged horses with dolphins and stuff coming out around him. The empire was divided into 10 kingdoms. The kingdoms were ruled by the 10 sons of Poseidon and the mortal woman, Cleito. They were very knowledgeable people. They had a sophisticated irrigation and agricultural system, which helped them to produce food more effortlessly, which is probably why they could produce two harvests every year. They had lots of ships and a powerful navy that dominated the seas. And it's suggested that they may have had flying crafts and knowledge of crystal energy, very much like how it's portrayed in the Disney movie, which was always one of my favorite Disney movies, and I think very underrated. Anyway, not the point. The point is that they had lots of knowledge. They had this vast understanding of astronomy, math, geometry, far ahead of everyone else in the world. They valued art, philosophy, and spirituality, blending science and religion kind of into just one thing. The Atlanteans were just, noble, and wise until they weren't. A tale as old as time, right? They became arrogant and power hungry, and they decided they wanted to conquer the world. It said the gods were displeased with the arrogance of the Atlanteans, and according to Plato, quote, in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea, end quote. However, when all this was happening around 9600 BCE, it was also the end of the Ice Age. There were massive floods which could have swallowed up Atlantis, and some people also think that maybe a comet hit the Earth, which I talked about, and caused Atlantis to disappear. The question is, did Plato just make all this up? Because at the time, Athens was they were in a tumultuous time. They weren't being great people. Plato was obviously this philosopher. He wrote lots of stories. Wrote lots of tales. So, was he trying to write this tale to convince everybody to like be better people? A lot of people think that. People are like, "Oh, Atlantis just made up. Plato just made it up to cause people to be better." But if that was the case, there wouldn't be so many cultures that wrote about a similar place. So let's start with Egypt, because that's where the original source of Plato's tale came from. They claimed they preserved records of Atlantis in their temple archives. They described Atlantis as this great empire that fought early Athens and perished in a flood, which is what we know of from Plato's telling. There is also a story carved into the walls of the Temple of Edfu, which describes the lost civilization that was flooded and destroyed. Egypt has a very precise recording lineage of kings going back like 35,000 years. So they record things, they have archives for everything. So then they have this story of one of their gods named Tho, who was allegedly born on an island where he gained great knowledge about the world, the universe, astronomy, writing, government, and even how to achieve immortality. He recorded all this on slabs of emerald called the Emerald Tablets. He was instructed to pass these Emerald Tablets on to the next generation. These tablets should continue to move forward with the generations because at the time when he came to Egypt, they didn't have this civilization. It was just like a bunch of savages living in Egypt. So he was actually the person to introduce civilization to this group of people that were otherwise uncivilized. This is like 36,000 years ago, right before their king record starts. So all these kings for the last 35,000 years were supposed to pass these emerald tablets onwards so that way everyone had the same knowledge. That's how they created ancient Egypt as we know it. He also was the person that introduced the Egyptians to the pyramids, which were leftover relics from Tho's original civilization that was destroyed in the flood. So was Tho Atlantean? That's kind of the idea. We have this tale in Greece, obviously, because Plato was from Greece, but even before him, Greek mythology contained hints of Atlantis. So Poseidon was said to have fathered mortal children on an island kingdom. He divided the land among them, and that's where the concentric rings on the island come from. And this echoes Poseidon's association with earthquakes and the sea, and that's why Atlantis. So they actually made Poseidon mad, and that's why he sunk Atlantis, was with earthquakes and a flood. We also have the same story or a similar story in Hindu and Vedic traditions. So Sanskrit text speaks of Atala and Dvipa. So Atala was a paradise swallowed by the ocean. We've heard that before. And Dvipa were great continental islands destroyed by floods. The epic Mahabharata detailed a war between cousins, but in this epic, they described flying machines and weapons with devastating power. This epic was written between 400 BCE and 400 CE, and this is one of the world's largest poems with over 100,000 stanzas. Mesopotamia has flood myths as well. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it tells of Utnapishtim surviving a great flood that destroyed an earlier age of man. Some think that this is Noah's flood, but the only person to survive, or the only people to survive Noah's flood, was Noah and his family, so this was a different flood. Other Sumerian texts describe Eridu, a god-built city destroyed by waters, and this aligns with the pattern of a drowned golden civilization. Mesoamerican legends talk about this as well. The Aztecs spoke of Aztlan, a beautiful homeland across the sea from which their ancestors actually journeyed after a great destruction. And the Mayans had myths of Toulon, a radiant city that fell into chaos and disaster. The Hopi tell of a third world, so a high civilization destroyed by flood before survivors emerged into the fourth world. All of these stories seem very similar to Atlantis. Celtic lore also have a story of Atlantis. So Irish folklore tells of High Brazel, a mystical island west of Ireland. The island was shrouded in mist and visible only once every 7 years. It was described as a land of wealth and advanced knowledge. Norse mythology talk about Asgard, which was the home of the gods. That's where Odin lived, or Thor. If you've watched the Marvel movies, you've heard of Asgard. So Asgard was said to be this shining realm built in circular fortifications that had an edge that you could fall off of, much like an island. Asgard is said to have been destroyed in a great cataclysm during Ragnarok. When there are this many different cultures that have tales of the same place, it's hard to chalk it up to just a myth or a legend. They all tell stories of this gleaming city with great knowledge and power that suddenly disappeared in a fire or a flood. And there is a decent amount of evidence available today that suggests that Atlantis was real and not just some made up story. What makes a real Atlantis plausible in physical terms is the post last glacial sea level rise that remapped coastlines worldwide. New geological data show dramatic early Holocene sea level change. High resolution peat and sediment cores from places like the North Sea reveal pulses of very rapid rise and overall sea level increases of tens of meters during the early Holocene, exactly the window when well placed coastal, low lying civilizations could have been inundated and then erased from easy recovery. A major 2025 Nature study reconstructed a detailed early Holocene sea level curve from North Sea peats and documents rapid pulses and a total rise measured in many tens of meters after the last ice age. So this means that shoreline settlements, continental shelves, and coastal plains where people may have lived were submerged between 11,000 and 6,000 years ago. So Doggerland is a prime example of this. This area is now submerged, but connects Britain to continental Europe and didn't used to be submerged. The question is, and what everyone keeps asking is, where exactly was Atlantis located? There are several places it could have been, but not one place seems to be just right. So a lot of people think maybe Santorini or Thera, and the volcanic activity in the area at the time was massive. So volcanoes could have created tsunamis and devastation throughout the region. On the island of Crete, for example, where the Minoan palaces and coastal societies were, they were dramatically affected by these tsunamis and other seismic activity in the area. This led to a rapid demise in Minoan maritime dominance. Plato's tale could have been about Santorini, but it doesn't fully add up. The timing is wrong, and the layout of Santorini isn't the same layout as is described in Atlantis, and he was very specific about what the layout would have looked like. Next is the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It is about a 40-kilometer diameter series of concentric rings visible from space in the Sahara Desert. Visually, it is similar to what Plato describes for Atlantis. It has mountains to its north and possibly could have opened to the ocean in the south. It also has white, black, and red stones and an abundance of metals and gold in the region of the world. An ancient map drawn by Pomponius Mela in 43 AD has the label Atlante in the area of the Richat structure. They say, of course, that there is no evidence of a Bronze Era ever happening there, but it's also one of the least studied places on Earth because they say it's like super dangerous, red zone, military, militia. Like there's plenty of people that want to kill you in that area, so people just don't go there to study it because they might die. But from satellite images, you can see ancient man-made structures throughout the entire region. But any exploration of the area is apparently too risky, so nobody has done it. But of course, they're like, oh, Atlantis wasn't there. That's ridiculous. It's not even underwater anymore. The Azores sit on the Atlantic and have often been proposed as part of a remnant of an Atlantic landmass. This landmass is submerged underwater and is in the Atlantic, so that kind of checks all the boxes. Sonar scans of the area show a pyramid type structure underwater in the area, which we know that potentially, I guess, that Tho was saying that the pyramids in Egypt were Atlantean. So, could the pyramid in the Azores also be Atlantean? Could the pyramids all around the world be Atlantean? There is an area of the Bahamas that is suggested to be a remnant of Atlantis. Feels too small of an area to be Atlantis, maybe part of it. Lastly, some theories suggest that maybe Antarctica was once Atlantis. This theory suggests that Antarctica was once this like beautiful, temperate land, but a catastrophic pole shift buried it under ice. This could have happened at the end of the Ice Age, which is around the same time that we're thinking all of this was happening, that this pole shift happened. The rest of the world, which was under ice, now became not under ice. And then Antarctica, which was this beautiful place, this temperate, beautiful place to live, is now under ice. And with that theory, a lot of people think that maybe the Atlanteans just went underground, and that's the people that are living under Antarctica down, which is another reason that we're not allowed to go. But what if Atlantis wasn't one place, but was everywhere, right? Because we kind of talked about this in the intro. It wasn't just this island, like Plato suggested, it was this world civilization. The Egyptian god Thoth introduced the Egyptians to civilization firstly, but also the pyramids, and said that they were left over from his civilization that was destroyed in a flood. But that wasn't the one thing left behind from that civilization. The Sphinx has evidence that it is older than what they initially thought it was and has evidence of a flood on it. The heads on Easter Island are said to have full bodies underneath the surface. Like, were they from the time of Atlantis and then buried in the flood? Potentially. Some people actually point to Tartaria for that as well. There are other structures that are suggested to be Atlantean as well, like the Kailash Temple in India, Gunung Padang in Indonesia, Saskay Human in Peru, the Yanaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, the Aztec and Mayan temples in Latin America. Off the coast of Cuba, there are sunken ruins that appear to resemble a city. These places happen all over the world. Anywhere there's a pyramid, that might have been Atlantean. I mentioned in the pyramid episode that they might all be related, and this could be why. And actually, in that episode, I mentioned that they were sending wireless energy back and forth, and everyone's like, why would they be sending wireless energy? Well, if Atlantis was the whole world and not just this tiny little island that we've been suggested to believe, that could be why they were sending energy. They might already know about it all, though. Turns out, secret societies may have been uncovering Atlantean knowledge for centuries and hiding it. In the 11th century, Hughes de Paynes led a mission to Constantinople in what is present-day Turkey. He and his men met with a group called the Brothers of the East, where they heard a story similar to what we're talking about today, a highly advanced civilization that met its demise due to a flood. But it wasn't just a city, it was a global civilization. What if the city that Plato explained was just the capital city? This could explain why people seem to be finding underwater civilizations all over the world and calling it Atlantis. Because every time they find anything underwater, they're like, oh, this must be the lost civilization of Atlantis. Well, how come they find it in the Atlantic and in the Pacific and in the, like, all over, in all different bodies of water? If Atlantis was only supposed to be in the Atlantic off the connection to the Mediterranean. This also could be why Atlas, the Titan in Greek mythology, who's like holding up the entire world, this could be why he's holding up the entire world, because Atlantis actually means Isle of Atlas. According to the Brothers of the East, this civilization had great knowledge about the world, the universe, math, and so on. They also had wireless energy, flying machines, and could levitate items. This wireless energy may have been transported via the pyramids all around the world. The civilization didn't have any war or poverty, And everyone just kind of like cohabitated peacefully because they weren't worried about what was happening here. They were worried about the future and moving on. Hugh heard this story and was so fascinated by it that he created a group of men that were tasked with uncovering secrets of that civilization. That group became known as the Knights Templar. They uncovered what was used as the ancient source of fuel for this global energy system. He was so focused on this global energy system. How were they sending energy back and forth? What they found was the fuel for this was called manna or mana. The first mention of mana is in the Old Testament of the Bible as a food source for the Israelites as they were wandering in the desert. It was described as like white flakes that looked like frost, and the Israelites were instructed to collect it every morning and eat it, but only enough for that day, except for on Saturday they would have to collect enough for also Sunday. The Atlanteans collected this from plants and animals using this very specific process and then turned it into this white powder. When used the right way, it provided a clean, unlimited, free energy. This process was written on the Emerald Tablets, which was eventually recovered by the Knights Templar, which is why they understood all of it. It also explained how mana could be used to make objects lighter and levitate them. This could explain how the pyramids and other such structures were built, because so many people have questions like, how are the pyramids built? How did the heads get there on Easter Island? How did Stonehenge get to be where it's at? Especially when they're using rocks from like really far away to make these different structures. The Knights also found texts that predated Atlantis that talked of a non-human race that enslaved humans to mine for gold, which we talked about this in the Anunnaki episode. That's what they were doing. And in Sumerian texts, there is a substance they called Shimana, which helped the Anunnaki power their flying crafts. In Hindu texts, this substance was called Vimana, used for the same types of things. Polynesian cultures refer to mana as a supernatural force that permeates the entire universe, and Buddhists call this substance mani. Because what the Knights Templar was discovering was going against the church at the time, and the church was so prevalent, they were just getting stronger and stronger. They had to cover up all their findings. So they went into hiding. They went into started finding everything in secret, keeping everything in secret because they didn't want to be persecuted. But they continued on collecting artifacts for themselves. Things such as the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail, collecting more and more knowledge. Some even say they have knowledge of immortality. So this makes me wonder, is this why we see like famous people now that resemble or like almost look like clones or potentially the same person as famous people from centuries ago? The first person that popped into my head was like William Shakespeare being Anne Hathaway's husband right now. But there's a number of different celebrities that look like celebrities from hundreds of years ago. Officially, the Knights Templar got caught and disbanded in 1312, but that's only the official story. If they have immortality, they can rewrite history as they see fit. So they could say, yeah, we disbanded. Oops, sorry, bye. Granted, some of them were burned at the stake, but not all of them. A lot of them escaped. Many of them ran to different corners of the world. A group of them escaped to Scotland and renamed themselves. They are known as the Freemasons, while others escaped and went to other places. It makes you wonder just how many secret societies the Knights Templar ended up becoming. But they still have this knowledge. All this knowledge that they gained, they still have it. And I'm sure they just passed it down generation to generation until today. So, was Atlantis real? Was it not? That's up for you to decide. I'm not here to make up your mind for you. But until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.